If you really get uncomfortable around conflict and really struggle with conflict resolution, then this episode of the Self-Improvement Room is for you. Hello and welcome to the Self-Improvement Room podcast. This is episode number 52 and I'm your host, Christy Davis. This week, we are talking about conflict and how to master the art, because I really do believe it's an art, of conflict resolution. And we're going to talk about how to handle difficult people with confidence. Now, before we do that, I want to invite you to our new Self-Improvement Room Facebook community. It's a great little group for sharing what we're going through, talking about our own personal development, looking for advice or validation. We will leave the link for the group in the show notes and we hope to see you there. So that's the Self-Improvement Room new Facebook community. All right, conflict is really an inevitable part of life. Unless you're going to stay inside, not speak to anybody, not ever share your opinions or ideas, then you might be safe, but you're probably going to be very unhappy. So whether it's at work or in your own personal relationships, or even if it's with a stranger, we all face situations where handling difficult people becomes a challenge and sometimes a real source of stress. Growing up, I was terrible with this. I would either hold my tongue, like bite really hard and not say anything, or I would really just let it all go and let it all out. And then we would have a real conflict burning. So I didn't have an in-between. I didn't have that kind of sweet spot where I was firm and kind. But I believe with the right skills, anyone can master conflict resolution. Anyone can manage difficult people and turn really tense situations into opportunities for growth and connection and opportunities to get you to where you are trying to go. So let's take a look at, firstly, some of the key elements of conflict resolution, including self-confidence, which is actually a huge one, emotional regulation, which is probably the main one, empathy, and perspective. And I also want to talk about the importance of knowing what outcome you actually want from the conversation or from the conflict and how to achieve it, even if it requires you to give more than you take. So let's start with that one. Understanding the result you want. I read a book by Dale Carnegie called How to Win Friends and Influence People. I've read it a few times now, and I found it incredibly helpful to understand how much people actually do care about themselves and how much people like to talk about themselves. There are some people that aren't like that, but a lot of us love to talk about ourselves and we love to be involved with our own lives. Now that's nothing bad. That is just mostly humans. That's just what we do. That's what we love. That's what makes us feel comfortable. And when I was reading the book, it really emphasizes understanding that in people and then using that to your advantage. Now that might sound like you are mistreating somebody and tricking them, but really, give and take is about understanding that sometimes people can't give more than they take. So therefore, we're not manipulating, but rather taking control of the situation so we can get a favorable outcome. Conflict resolution isn't just about winning the argument or proving a point, and that is something that I've really had to work on because I like to win an argument and I always like to prove my point. But sometimes you have to realize that neither of those matter if you're trying to get a certain result. In fact, neither of those can matter if you are trying to get a certain result. What is the outcome you want from the conflict? That is the number one question. Understanding what the conflict is about and what you need from it, and it might even just be peace. But understanding that result, that outcome, will allow you to understand your motive behind resolving the conflict. And once you understand your motive and the outcome you want, it becomes a lot easier to understand the actions that you might have to take. And it becomes a lot easier to accept the actions that you might have to take in order to resolve the conflict. So sometimes it means finding a compromise, but almost always it's about engaging in give and take and understanding how important your outcome is as to how much you're willing to give or how much you're trying to take. So firstly, identify your priorities. Before you enter a difficult conversation, take time to identify what your priority is. Sometimes the conflict might arise out of nowhere and you've had no time to prepare. That's when getting really good at conflict builds the muscles that you need to respond quickly and effectively to conflict most of the time. But you have to understand, if you're going into a conversation that you know will be difficult, you have to understand what your priority is and what you're willing to compromise on. And by clarifying your priorities, you can focus on achieving that outcome that matters most. But you really also do need to think about what you're willing to compromise on, because there will be some things that you just cannot compromise on. And that is where a lot of the difficulty will arise. Conflict resolution very often requires give and take. Be open to finding the middle ground that meets both parties' needs. That doesn't always feel very good. In fact, most of the time it doesn't, because we all feel like we are in the right. We're asking for these things, so we think it should go the way we want it to go. But unfortunately, it doesn't always work like that. And it doesn't mean that you have to give up your values and beliefs, but it does mean being flexible and willing to adapt. Number 3, and this is incredibly important, and I've seen it play out in my own life many times, and the level of importance was always very underestimated from my side of things, and that is communicate clearly. So once you've identified and figured out what your outcome is that you want, you need to be able to communicate it clearly to the other person. When I finished my counselling diploma and I was getting ready to go to university, my teacher said, "Do you know how to write academically?" And I had always written academically when I was young. But when I learned about business and marketing and learned that world of writing copy, they call it, or captions for social media, or writing marketing scripts, I had to learn to write like I was communicating with people who were about 10 years of age. They teach you to communicate as you would with somebody who is around that age. Communication needs to be very clear. So let them know what you are hoping to achieve and why it matters to you. Some people won't care, but it's still a step in the process, because clear communication can help prevent misunderstandings, and it can create an environment where you work together a little more to try to get to where you want to go. Compromising really does take a lot of emotional maturity. So knowing the result that you want from a conversation allows you to approach the conflict with intention and purpose, which is how we should really approach our life. So it helps to stay focused on finding a resolution that aligns with your goals while remaining open to compromise. I didn't say this was easy. I just said that anyone can do it. It takes practice. All right. The foundation, I think one of the foundations, or probably the foundation of conflict resolution is self-confidence. Handling difficult people often comes down to your self-confidence. When you believe in yourself and your ability to navigate challenging conversations and challenging situations, you are much less likely to be intimidated or overwhelmed. Confidence allows you to really stand firm in your beliefs, but still remain open to other people's perspectives. It's about balancing assertiveness, so firm, with humility, with kind. So knowing that you have the strength to handle whatever comes your way. And I remember my mum coming to me and telling me this story. She'd gone to the shops and she wanted to take back, I don't know, I think it might have been a DVD player or something. This was years ago. And she said they just wouldn't even listen to me. They were so rude. And she said, look, I've got everything I need, but they just wouldn't listen to me. Now, to paint you the picture, my mum is like the softest person on the planet. She's just so easy to get along with. I've literally never, ever heard her swear. And I don't think she's even raised her voice at me. Like, I don't know how she does it because I really didn't get that side of her. I wish I had have, but I didn't. But she'd come to me and she was quite upset. And I was like very angry. And I took the receipt down and I was really probably ready for the conflict. And I just said, I'd like to get a refund for this. Thank you. Being my confident self. And that same lady said, sure, no problem at all. And like that, it was done. And I really believe the difference was confidence. She knew that she wasn't going to get away with sending me away. She knew that I was there for my refund that I was entitled to. When she looked at my mum, she could feel, and she took advantage of the fact that my mum didn't have that confidence, but was rather way more kind than she was firm. So confidence is a huge thing. So that means really knowing your worth. So you've got to start by recognizing your value and understand that your opinions and your feelings are valid, even if they're different from anybody else's. When you believe in your self-worth, you naturally project confidence in all of your interactions. And I've learned that with myself throughout my growth journey. Practicing self-awareness. I probably talk about this all of the time in almost every episode. But confidence grows when you understand yourself. Take the time to reflect on your strengths, look at your weaknesses, and most of all, look at your triggers. Once you look at them, if you're like me, you'll realize you have a real lot of them. You start to work backwards and reduce those triggers so that you don't lose control of who you are and so that you don't actually hand over control of who you are to somebody else. Because that's what being triggered is. It's kind of putting your hand up and saying, hey, you can take control of my feelings. You get to say how I feel. And when I learned that, it was much easier to become less triggered because I didn't want to give that power to anybody else but me. So knowing yourself really helps you approach conflict with a more calm and composed mindset. And I can tell you, having ADHD makes that difficult because our prefrontal cortex, the part that allows us to interact well and think before we speak, is quite affected, as is our emotional regulation and positive self-talk. The way that we speak to ourselves really impacts the way you handle conflict. So make sure you replace your negative self-talk with more positive self-talk. Remind yourself that you are capable, you are resilient, and you are worthy of respect. If you don't actually feel that, then remind yourself that you are capable of learning to be resilient. You're capable of being worthy of respect. And work on that because that is very important. Confidence doesn't mean arrogance or inflexibility though. So I just want to point that out. It just means having faith in your abilities while remaining open to learning and growth. So when you approach conflict with self-confidence, you create a space for constructive dialogue. So much better, much healthier conversations rather than escalating that tension. And that is usually what happens when you've got two people entering a conflict and they don't have the skills to resolve it. They generally escalate the tension. Now, having those skills or tools to resolve it means having emotional regulation. And something that I've learned over my life is, firstly, that's a very, very difficult thing to do. I really struggle with it, but work hard on it. Secondly, I think majority of people struggle with regulating their emotions. And that means staying calm under pressure. Emotional regulation is it's such a critical skill in life, but in conflict resolution. So when you are facing difficult people, whether that's at work or at home or just down the street trying to get your DVD player returned, it's easy to let emotions like anger and frustration or even fear take over. But reacting emotionally can and usually makes the situation worse. So by learning to regulate your emotions, you can remain calm and focused. And so that really means breathing. Really breathe. They say that diaphragmatic breathing, when I call it gone limbic, which is the part of the brain that looks after those emotions, but when you have just shut off and you're so angry and you're in your emotions or fearful or frustrated, take a breath. And they say that it calms you by 50%. And it's true. I just forget to take the breath a lot of the time. But when I do, I'm 50% calmer. So we really have to make sure that we keep our emotions in check. Because reacting emotionally, honestly, will make the situation worse majority of the time. By learning to regulate your emotions, you can remain calm, but you can also remain calm even when there's adversity and conflict. And that is the goal. So how do you stay emotionally regulated? As I said, pause and breathe. Deep breathing, diaphragmatic breathing, actually activates your parasympathetic nervous system. So that helps you calm your mind and your body. And it's such a simple technique, and it can really prevent you from impulsive reactions and give you time to think before responding. Now, having a music career for my entire life and teaching singing, and more specifically breathing, you think I would have the most emotionally regulated system on the planet, but I really have to practice it in this manner. So I always breathe diaphragmatically. But when I am stressed, or I feel fearful, or I feel angry, I very much struggle to calm down because my heart rate speeds up and all of my emotions start taking over. That's when, again, we can take that breath and that starts to slow the heart rate and turn that parasympathetic nervous system on. It's also important to acknowledge your emotions. So instead of suppressing your feelings, because that can actually be really bad for you, it can turn your stress response system on, you should acknowledge them. So understand that it's okay to feel angry or hurt or fearful or upset, because by recognizing your emotions, you can address them in a healthy way rather than letting them control your actions. So it's totally fine to feel these things. We just have to be aware of them and then address them effectively so that they don't hijack our system, hopefully at all, but sometimes that is just impossible most of the time. But we want to at least make sure they don't hijack our system for a very long time. And try to focus on solutions. So shift your focus from the problem to the solution. Ask yourself, what can I do to resolve this situation? This mindset will keep you grounded, and it prevents you from getting lost in all of your emotions, getting too cranky or too fearful or flighty. Emotional regulation, again, as I said, doesn't mean ignoring your feelings. That is not regulating. That is suppressing. It just means managing them in a way that allows you to respond more thoughtfully and react the same way. When you can stay calm under pressure, you are better equipped to handle difficult people and navigate conflict with much more grace and humility. The next thing that is very helpful when it comes to conflict resolution is empathy. Now, I've always been a very empathetic person, and having the childhood that I've had, it made me even more empathetic. It made me even more understanding. But I have come to learn to realize that empathy is something that a lot of people still need to develop. So empathy is really putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and seeing the situation from their perspective. Haven't yet developed that skill, or maybe even don't know what empathy is and that they could be using that as a tool. So empathy is the ability, again, to understand and share the feelings of somebody else. In conflict resolution, empathy allows you to see the situation from the other person's perspective, which is incredibly crucial. It doesn't mean that you have to agree with them, but it does mean that you should be recognizing their emotions and experience as valid. And that's so hard to do. Again, that empathy comes down to emotional maturity in cases of conflict resolution. Well, I think they do. So how do you practice empathy? You listen actively. So one of the best ways to show somebody that you are empathetic is to pay attention to what they are saying without interrupting and without planning your response. A lot of people listen to respond rather than listening to understand. By really listening to what they are saying, you can gain a deeper understanding of their perspective, which may make conflict resolution a lot easier. You should also consider validating their feelings. So acknowledge to them their emotions. Even if you don't agree with that viewpoint, you can say something like, I understand that you're feeling frustrated. I get that you're feeling upset. I really understand that this is hurting you. This validation can really help de-escalate tension and create, again, that more open communication. And put yourself in their shoes. That's really what empathy is about. Try to imagine what the other person is experiencing. What could possibly be motivating their behavior? What fears or insecurities could be really driving those actions? By putting yourself in their shoes, you can approach the situation with much more compassion and understanding. So just remember, empathy doesn't mean compromising your own needs and definitely doesn't mean compromising your boundaries. It just means recognizing that the conflict is often driven by our emotions, and that addressing those emotions can lead to just a more productive conversation. So let's look at perspective, because that is the bigger picture. Perspective is about seeing the bigger picture in play and understanding that conflict is just a part of the larger relationship or situation. So when you approach conflict with a broad perspective, you're much less likely to get caught up in the heat of the moment and more likely to find a solution that's going to benefit everyone involved. And you really should want that. Sometimes that's hard because you just want to make yourself happy. But you may never ever resolve the conflict if that's the approach you take. So to develop perspective, take a step back. So during that conflict, it's easier to become laser focused on the issue at hand. But if you can take a step back and just look at the bigger picture, ask yourself, how does this conflict fit into the larger context of the relationship or the situation. And that perspective, I think, can really help you approach that conversation with a more balanced mindset. I know all of this stuff really does boil down to emotional maturity. And that can be so hard. It really can. But with practice and understanding these concepts and using these tools, you can get there. You can master it. I shouldn't say master. We don't have to aim to master it, but you can get very good at it. Now, when you're developing perspective, you should really consider the long-term goals as well. Think about what you actually want to achieve in the long run. Is this conflict worth damaging a relationship over? What outcome is going to benefit both of us in the long term? By considering those long-term goals, you can approach conflict with a more strategic mindset. And in the midst of conflict, if you haven't already considered these things and practiced these things and kind of rehearsed this in your mind, it can be very difficult to have a strategic mindset. So to get good at some of these things, you actually need to practice them. And that doesn't mean going out trying to find somebody to fight or have a conflict with. It just means visualizing what you can do if you were in a conflict. How would I solve this? How can I always look at things from a strategic mindset point of view? And that can be not just with conflict, that can be with life in general. And lastly, recognize patterns. Sometimes conflict is part of a larger pattern of behavior, either yours or the other person's. So by recognizing those kinds of patterns, you can address the root cause of the issue rather than just the symptoms. That perspective also allows a more meaningful resolution, and then you can move on and grow from there. But if you just keep putting a band-aid over it and not getting to the root of the problem, you're going to consistently come back or fall back into that conflict. So really try to work on recognizing if there are patterns of behavior that are causing the conflict. Perspective really helps you to stay grounded and focused on the bigger picture. So making it easier to find a resolution that again aligns with your long-term goals. Conflict doesn't have to be a source of stress or anxiety. A lot of the time it is, but it really doesn't have to be. Because with self-love and self-worth and confidence and all of these tools we've discussed in this episode of the podcast, you can become quite good at it and it doesn't really affect you. And that's where I'm at most of the time. But I really have to check in with myself if I do let somebody hijack my emotions and hijack the whole conflict process. So when you master or when you really work on and get good at conflict resolution skills like self-confidence, emotional regulation, empathy, and perspective, you can handle difficult people with confidence and again, humility. Understanding the result that you want from the conversation and being open to that give and take can also lead to a far more productive and meaningful resolution. Just remember that conflict, unfortunately, is a natural part of life, and it is positively an opportunity for growth and connection. And with the right mindset and skills, you can turn even the most challenging and difficult situations into opportunities for change, opportunities for growth. So next time you find yourself in a difficult conversation or in conflict, take that breath. Take a moment to pause. Go, okay. And then trust in your abilities and approach the situation with confidence and empathy. It will make a massive difference. I promise you that. All right, I hope you have enjoyed episode number 52 of the Self-Improvement Room. I'm Christy Davis. Please join us in our Self-Improvement Room Facebook community, where we talk about more of this stuff, and I go live, and we are all just there to support each other. We will leave the link for that group in the show notes. And make sure, if you like the podcast and you're getting something from it, make sure you follow it so you know when the next episode is available. And then you can make time to tune in and just take a moment out for yourself. All right, until next time, please stay safe and stay well.